out to Socrates. Socrates still trying to get the opening. Oh, Socrates! Whoa!
And there it is. The crazy gang have beaten the Culture Club.
Maggie Thatcher, can you hear me? Maggie Thatcher, your boys took a hell of a beating. Your boys took a hell of a beating.
Hello and welcome to You Have to Say That's Magnificent, our World Cup offshoot here at Your Boys Took a Hell of a Beating. I guess there's truly no limit to how many iconic football commentary links we can get into our podcast titles. For those of you spotted that I don't sound quite scouse enough to be Stephen Scragg, well done to you. I'm Aidan Williams, self-confessed World Cup obsessive, and therefore obviously I'm quite pleased to be delving into World Cups past and perhaps even present as we go along here. But if you're missing Stephen's dulcet tones, fear not. He's here too. Hello there, Stephen. You okay?
It's weird being on this side of the microphone. It's reassuringly nice though. It's yeah. I'm looking forward to this greatly.
Let's not get too cozy and think you're going to have a total easy time of it, Stephen. We're going to be testing your knowledge of World Cup hosts, shall we say? So, yes, we're starting a 3-part epic here. Well, epic might be a bit of an overstatement. Looking at each of the 2026 World Cup hosts and their history in the competition. I'll have a few different voices join me on the way, but Stephen, we are opening our cans of Labatt's and Molson's. We're popping on some Bryan Adams and Alanis Morissette, perhaps. Heading off to the land of the Mounties, hockey of the icy variety, maple syrup poutine. And we'll be putting on our red maple leaf shirts, delving into Canada's brief flirtations with the World Cup. So first off then, I guess before we get into things too much, I've gone into stereotype overload there, as is only fair, I think. Mentioning hockey, I think there's something to say on this, though, before we get too far in, because I think far and away, obviously, that is the most popular sport in Canada. It's a sporting obsession of the nation, if you like. It's what football is to us, is hockey for them. Is there perhaps something in hockey's dominance then, both culturally and, I guess, in terms of participation, viewing figures, news agenda and all of that, being one of the biggest reasons why it's taken Canada such an awful long time to develop professional football infrastructure and to make its mark internationally a bit more consistently?
It's had a long way to try and bridge, hasn't it? And we can't say it's really done it as yet, but it's got a lot further than it did in days of yore where they weren't even taking part. You know, they were going decades between internationals and all that type of stuff. It's clearly going to be a slow burning thing for Canada, but I think bit by bit, you know, and North America generally, you know, it's one of the last great, I don't know, kind of land masses to fall for the round ball, without a shadow of doubt, but. There's certainly a generation upcoming that will see it in a completely different light than maybe our generation over in Canada do and previous. No, the Canadian boomer generations, the Canadian Generation X, will see it in a 1986 specific light. But I'm pretty sure millennials, Generation Z, will see football totally differently. But yeah, as far as the ice hockey is concerned. It's stratospheric and it's way out there. But yeah, I suppose we can point to, they had a decent representation in the NASL years in the Vancouver Whitecaps. They were one of the cooler teams, franchises, if we will.
Still going strong in new form, I suppose.
Absolutely. So there's always been a vague interest in it. I think we would have to say that could only be sated by. Reaching a World Cup in 1986, coming close to reaching a World Cup in 82, and then that massive gap, but then doing so again to qualify last time, to be co-host this time around. You are going to get this generation that grows up with football being a big thing in Canada.
And I guess it's a few decades really, or a couple of generations even behind its neighbour to the south as well, even though they're way behind the time. So a lot of catching up to do. But a bit of background then on Canada. They actually joined FIFA quite early on, 1912 in their case. And in fact, had already played a couple of internationals against the USA in the late 19th century. So they were actually alongside the USA. These were unofficial matches according to FIFA anyway, but this was a time where only the British internationals had been played. So this is ahead of Argentina and Uruguay, the other pioneers who wouldn't play until 1901. So there you go, Canada and the USA ahead of the times at one point. Their officially first FIFA-approved fixtures came many years later, though, 1923, in a tour of Australia, cricket or rugby-style tour. They would soon withdraw from FIFA, though, along with the British associations in 1928 for the same reasons, the amateur question, whether that was in solidarity with the British, who knows. They rejoined in 1948, but only took part in World Cup qualifying for the first time in 1957. They indeed won their very first match. What could possibly go wrong from there? They beat the USA in a qualifier 5-1 in Toronto. They lost out to Mexico, though, which I guess that will be a bit of a theme over the years, perhaps unsurprisingly. They seemed a bit jolted by the early effort, Stephen. You kind of alluded to this already. They withdrew from the 62 tournament, didn't enter in 1966, before failing to progress 1970 qualifiers, thanks to a goalless draw with Bermuda. I mean, come on, contrast there. Canada and Bermuda. This is incredible. So I guess, yeah, you've already alluded a little bit. These early travails nicely set us up for where Canada sits in the footballing landscape in this historical context. Not just a backwater, a frozen over backwater at this point. That Bermuda one, the contrast to that, I think that's just magnificent in football.
It really is. I mean, going back to like the 58 qualifiers, they don't disgrace themselves at all. They beat the United States twice, and you look at the results there. They lost to Mexico, a confirmed football playing nation. With World Cup hosting aspirations only 12 years away from coming to fruition. So I think they lost 2-0 and 3-0 maybe against Mexico, which was considering that the United States were shipping 6s and 7s in those games. So for Canada to kind of like keep Mexico respectable in the 2 games they played there, and then to beat the United States as well, shows that they were, if anything, they should have. They were out the starting blocks quicker. So obviously America had 1950 and that victory against England and all that type of that part of it. Semi-finalists in 1930. They've had a little bit of a grounding, but certainly as the 1960s loom, you'd think Canada are out of this fresh set of blocks. As far as kind of like future World Cups are concerned, but it wasn't to be, and it wasn't really to be until 58 to 82 when they really make a flirtation with the World Cup.
Yeah, well, exactly. There was a couple of more Mexican-inflicted eliminations in the 1970s before we do pitch up in the 1980s. And yes, this, I guess, is where we're going to spend most of our time on this pod, I think. So, yeah, before we even get to 86, the 1982 qualifying saw a close shave with respectability and, I guess, indeed qualification. A win in their final match would have taken them to the World Cup. This was a match against Cuba, another footballing backwater. So this wasn't like they were up against some behemoth of the region. So they could have been off to a Spania 82. A 2-2 draw, though, coupled with Mexico also failing to win their final match, sent El Salvador to the World Cup, along with group winners Honduras. This was the days where the qualifiers were actually a regional tournament as well, hosted in one nation. So Honduras had the benefit of hosting this particular competition, but they were the group winners. El Salvador go to the World Cup, where it could have been Canada, it could have been Mexico. Didn't go so well for them in Spain, did it? So can we surmise that Canada may have been similarly out of their depth at this point?
You would have to think so. You would have to think so. I'm sure there's certain people involved with that Canadian side that didn't qualify in 82 that were sat cracking open a beer to watch the El Salvador Hungary game in 82 and thought, you know what, we've dodged a bit of a bullet there, lads. We've dodged a bit of a bullet. But Canada had their flirtations, you say, the 70s as well. They really did have their chances, their opportunities, and in a way that frustration building towards this new outlook in 86 and bringing in Tony Waiters basically and looking away from Canadian shores to say, well, look, can I mean, it's also quite bizarre when you come to think about qualifying for 86 after the death of the NASL as well, and all of that. It always kind of like seems quite perplexing that why then? it's the USA bidding to host a World Cup in '94 when less than a decade prior to that tournament kicking off. This star-studded yet absolutely haphazard league that they had going on had folded. They were playing indoor football. There was nothing organised about it. Yeah, there's something just epically crazy gang about it all, and that's what makes kind of like Canada's run to the 1986 finals as special as. And yeah, they go away with three defeats, but they don't disgrace themselves in Mexico in any means, any way of the imagination. And Michel Platini was one to corroborate that as well in the wake of the game against France.
Well, quite well. Well, let's get them to 86 then. I mean, I guess one thing to note from 82 onwards is the qualifying for CONCACAF had 2 places rather than 1. So where Mexico were easier to be more dominant earlier, not that they made it every time by any means. It's slightly easier, although, not as easy as it is now for God knows how many teams they get qualifying now. 3 hosts plus 3 more, possibly. By the time we got to the 86 qualifiers, Canada actually done quite well at the 84 Olympics. I guess most of their players being utterly amateur probably helped a little bit in that respect. They lost in the quarterfinals to Brazil only on penalties. So there's a first brush with serious respectability. So yes, in World Cup terms, yes, they qualified for 86 by winning the CONCACAF Championship for the first time. It was a 2-1 win over Guatemala in the outpost of St. John's, Newfoundland, in freezing rain, which may or may not have helped on that occasion against the tropical Guatemalans. I guess it should be noted, though, that Mexico obviously weren't in this particular tournament as automatic qualifiers. So that also helped. But yeah, as you say, no professional league, no national league at all. You mentioned the English coach. So yeah, he's a former Blackpool and England goalkeeper, Tony Waiters. It's a great achievement, but yes, it's hard to imagine thoughts and feelings at this point in time where, yes, we talked about the previous World Cup. Honduras were reasonably okay and competent, whereas El Salvador weren't. That could have left to a few jitters in Canada's distinctly amateur setup. That indoor league football that you talked about there that's just one of those magnificently random occurrences that only a World Cup back in the day can really produce. This just wouldn't be a thing anymore, would it? But they're drawn obviously against France, Hungary, and the Soviet Union. Now, Hungary may sound like the weaker, and events kind of transpired that way, but they'd been the best European team in qualifying, the first to qualify. Only lost their final game when they were well and truly already in. France, obviously, semi-finalists the previous time. That's who Canada would have to face in their opening match. So it's a daunting prospect. And looking at some of the players they've got, the most colourful, I guess, is Igor Vrablic. Now, we'll come on to him after the World Cup as well. So we'll get to him a little bit further in due course. He scored the clinching goal against Guatemala. He, I guess, was the only player with much by way of footballing credentials at this stage playing in Belgium. Hardly for Anderlecht, though. But beyond that, yes, it's those indoor players. A few with British connections, either by UK birth or heritage. So we had Carl Valentine, hailing from Manchester, who played for West Brom. Terry Moore of Glentoran. Colin Miller of Rangers. So there's a bit of more credibility. But Vrablic, a little cut above most of them all. What on earth, though, could they possibly have thought they were getting themselves into, having to face Platini and co in that opening game?
Must have been frightening for them. But I mean, in a way, that they get there, they've climbed their mountain, to qualify, at all, to win that game in St. John's Park, which was basically was literally a park with some temporary stands thrown up. They could have played it in Vancouver. They could have played it in a former Olympic stadium. They had plenty of stadia of repute, but they wanted to make it difficult for Honduras, and they did. And within that, they've got results. When they need them, they did have this draw against Costa Rica in Toronto, which is why they kind of like, you look at that and think, well, that was a chance to get some 2 points on the on the board, but to go to Honduras and win, to eke out a draw in Costa Rica, and to give themselves this opportunity. And it's like, well, what can we do? You would put, more vaunted opponents, as Honduras were, because they'd been at a World Cup in '82, in as difficult an environment as possible. And, it's brilliantly underhand in so many ways. Yet they've come up with this system and they've played well in that game. They've deserved to qualify for the World Cup. You say no Mexico, but Mexico always, we always know they're flattered to deceive. You look at how quite, the worst team of the 1978 World Cup, played 3 games, didn't score a goal and conceded 10, and West Germany put 6 past them. And, so they were kind of, there's no...
They had a great kit, though, let's be honest.
Oh, great kiss. But there was no saying that was a Mexico that would have qualified for the 1986 World Cup, really, in a state of flux, if they hadn't have taken themselves out of the equation, shall we say. So, yeah, to get into that draw, to go to Mexico City and see those names come out of the hat, and to then realise, yes, you're in a group with France, but not just in a group with France, but you're going to be playing them first. You're first up. And I remember writing the '86 World Cup book, and the stories about how they were in the coach on the way to the stadium, and you've got supporters and not necessarily French supporters, but local Mexicans who kind of like they were kind of like tipping up to support France because they had all the stars. They wanted to see the big names doing well. So they were getting kind of like people coming up to the side of the coach and kind of like intimating how many goals Canada were going to concede. So they had all the classic kind of like, well, no one expects us to do anything here, and they just made it infinitely difficult for France to play. And the fact that they hold them to a goalless scoreline until kind of like 10 minutes from the end, and shows absolutely everything. And yes, you can turn around and say France underestimated Canada, didn't take it seriously enough, but at the same time, Canada just went at them. They made it difficult. They made it difficult for Honduras in qualifying. They made it difficult for everyone going along, and again they just went straight into it. And this was the game where this is where they could pull the surprises, they could pull all the shocks really, and say, look, this is what we're capable of. Because once it's seen that first time, then it becomes difficult to pull off again the second and the third time in the group games, because you've shown your hand, of how difficult you can be. So the next team's coming. There was a degree of Zaire 74 in that. Now Scotland were the ones who went into them first and found that stubbornness and how difficult they were. And then, then you had Yugoslavia come along and for varying reasons put 9 past them. So, because the surprise has been played out now. And it was France in a way that any nation, the big playing nation that gets to play the smaller nation first. You can look at France with Senegal in 2002. You can look at Argentina, Cameroon 1990. It's that football snobbery in that respect. And, we are mighty and you are small, and, we just need to tip up. And France get away with it on this occasion, but only just.
Yeah, only just, as you say, 1-0, very late goal from Papin, who'd missed a hatful by that point, I think. And but yeah, Canada really did play well, drew great praise from Platini himself, who I think was getting frustrated at all the press questions about how poor France had been, where he opted to praise his opponent, which shows that they did come in with spirit. But you're totally right. As much as Canada will have been daunted by facing France first up, the other way around, it's the most awkward time to face the minnow, I guess. Things didn't get much easier, though, in the next game with Hungary. A desperate Hungary, I guess, by this point, because they'd been absolutely thumped by the Soviet Union 6-0 in their first game, and will have had thoughts, even at this stage, with France to come for them as well in their final game, to maybe only getting 2 points from the group, perhaps, and looking at goal difference for their third place prospects. And that was in a bad state. So yes, with Canada up, they will have wanted to put on a decent show, get a few goals, and they scored within 1 minute. So I guess they were off to the perfect start, but couldn't keep it going. For Canada's perspective, and that's an awkward one when they're really up against it from the start, but I think they played pretty well again. And as they did against the Soviet Union, again, it was 2-0 defeats in both games. So ultimately, we've got to the end of the group stage with 3 defeats, no goals scored, 5 goals conceded, no points. But they were never poor. They were never outclassed in the way that everybody expected them to. So in all these situations, the France game, yes, they're the most up for it. Hungary, they're a goal down within a minute. I think they get a man sent off at that later in that game as well. And then the Soviet Union, very strong, excellent Soviet Union team that we've discussed on previous pods as well. And this was no easy situation for them. So yeah, ultimately came away with absolutely nothing. But what they did come away with was huge credit in the bank, I think.
Oh, huge amount. I mean, they were. It was brilliant watching them because they were just mysterious. You're thinking these interlopers that seemed out of place. That Canada were at a World Cup and like the Soviet Union having CCP across the front of the shirts, having Canada across the front of the shirts was like, it seemed really outlandish.
Nice touch, yes.
Brilliantly outlandish. And
just in case everyone forgot who they were.
Yeah, just in case. But I mean, that Hungary game in Rapatu, that was the one that Canada had set themselves out for and say, well, this is the game that we got a chance of winning. And I think after Hungary had put ship 6 against the Soviet Union, then they're going into that thinking, here's our chance. And to be one down within 60 seconds, 90 seconds, whatever it was a huge blow. And they were kind of chasing the game after that. And a bit of frustration kicks in, and it's Mike Sweeney who gets himself sent off. 5 minutes from the end. That in a way that's the one that kind of gets away from them. And you look at that draw and think, maybe if they were playing Hungary first, they might have caught them cold and got those. And one win could have been enough to take a team through to the knockout stages. In the case of Bulgaria in this tournament, not even a win, 2 draws were enough to send them through to the last 16. So yeah, Canada, definitely a heroic performance at these finals. The game against the Soviet Union, they play a heavily altered Soviet Union side, but still one that's massively with the strength and depth of that one. Protasov starts the game. And it's the only game he starts in that tournament. Doesn't play a single minute on the pitch with Belanov. He's substituted, just before the hour mark, and it's Belanov that comes on for him. But there's a lot of players who are rested for that game for the Soviet Union. But you look at the lineup, and still it's massively strong. Yeah, Chanov comes in for Dasev in goal, but there's still kind of like Bubnov's in the Kuznetsov, Bal, Yevtushenko, Elainikov. Protasov has mentioned Rodionov, who'd come on in previous games and would do against Belgium in the last 16. As kind of like an alternative to Zavarov. So yeah, I mean, within that as well, Lobanovsky's been concerned enough at 0-0. It's 0-0 when Belanov goes on. And that's the mad thing. So they've made Lobanovsky, someone as high profile as football purist of Valery Lobanovsky to be worried enough to send Belanov on for like more than half an hour in a bid to make sure that this game is won. And when Zavarov's thrown on, it's still only 1-0 then. So to throw on arguably his 2 biggest stars from the bench, who were there in a break glass in case of emergency kind of role. And I'm sure he wouldn't have wanted them to go out there and play in that heat and to conserve their energy for the last 16. But there they were, so they worried Lobanovsky. They worried the Soviet Union. They worried France. Yeah, it's just a shame that the game that they might well have had a chance of taking something from was the one that they kind of played the worst in, yet they only lost 2-0. That's the game where maybe they can get that goal, maybe they can get that point, maybe they could even upset the Ospelkart and win that match. So that's the only frustration there. But to leave that group without a point's no surprise. To leave that group with only conceding 5 goals is absolutely unreal. When you consider the talent that they were contained in that group with, as mentioned, Belanov, Protasov, Zavarov, Rats, Platini, Tiganar, Gires, Fernandez, Roshto. There's just a group dripping with talent, and Canada have made it uncomfortable for them.
Oh, very much so. And you're right to highlight the order of opponents. I think it just goes to show a lot of it is down to the luck of the draw of how things can turn out, not just in who you face, but the order. It does make a big difference. But yes, a positive debut on the whole, in spite of 0 points return. I guess what could have been something to build on, a first qualification, a moment of hope, going forwards with soon you had the USA as a prospective host on the horizon. Lots of opportunity for the raising of the profile of the game, even though obviously, as we know, at this point, there's no professional league in North America. But it didn't prove to be much to build on quite quickly. So Waiter stood down as Canada's head coach after the World Cup. Dodged a bullet, as it would turn out to be, because he passed the baton on to his assistant, another Englishman, Bob Bearpark. And it was him who took a bit of more of an experimental Canadian squad to Singapore in late August 1986 to take part in the Merlion Cup. That's, very prestigious when put up against the World Cup. But there you go, the Merlion Cup. It all went a bit wrong there, Stephen, didn't it?
Just a bit. Yeah, it's not the entire squad that went to the 86 World Cup. They do have, a few changes in there, but I got Vrablic is within this set of groups, and a card game has been hard, and a throwaway remark about the potential to earn some money seems to have circulated. That's, I think, been thrown in as a teaser, as a little bit of bait to see if anyone will bite, and enough players have bitten to try and put this in progress. And it's fallen down like a house of cards, unfortunately, and it's cost careers. You've had players in there as well that have agreed to be part of this match fixing incident and then backed out of it. They've had some that received the money and then given it back, saying, "No, I regret being part of this." And the sad part about this is that it's not for huge life-changing amounts. Yes, that's some pretty big money in 1986, but even by 1986 standards, it's not in football standards. That's not going to set a player up for life. That's not something you look at and think, I get why you've kind of like gambled all that away to kind of like, set yourself for life. This isn't life-setting sums of money.
Yes, it was a share of $100,000 that was offered to be split between however many agreed to it to throw a game against North Korea.
Yeah, I think it was 5 or 6 of them. So it was going to amount to about $20,000 each. Okay. And for a player like Vrablic, he played in Belgium, he was at that point in time, I think he'd shifted to Greece.
He was about to go to Olympiakos, yes, for the following season.
So he had he had a lot of stepping stones ahead of him that could have taken him through. All right, if he might not have had the talent to go and play in Serie A or La Liga or wherever it was, he'd certainly had the talent to play in Belgium, which was at that point in time a decent level of football. You couldn't knock the level of football there. That's a period of time in which Anderlecht have been winning significant European trophies. Bruges have been a fine side. Mechelen are just a couple of years away from winning the Cup Winners' Cup at that point in time. So that's decent football to be involved in. And if you're playing for Olympiakos, you're playing for one of the 2, 3, 4 biggest clubs in Greek football at that point in time. So all you can do is go and conquer those horizons. And if you become the biggest thing or one of the biggest things in Greek football, then other leagues and other teams are going to sit up and take notice. And for a player like Vrablic, who was 22, 23 at the time, he had so much.
Not even, he was still only 21 actually.
21.
So
we're not talking about a player that's his career's finished and it's coming towards the end, and it's a handy payday to bow out on or anything like that. And it remains massively head scratching. And he never really kind of, when I wrote that article about it and obviously wrote about it in the book and stuff like that, he'd become recluse. He stepped away from football within a couple of years. He wasn't in football at all. And it was such a sad end to a player that had the potential to be part of, further Canadian World Cup qualifying campaigns. If you say we're saying he's 21 in 1986, he could have been there to try and get them to the 1990 World Cup. He could have been there to try and get them to the 1994 World Cup. Canada going to the 1994 World Cup in the US would have been absolutely huge. You think that the US weren't part of that qualifying campaign, so it was kind of like, there's a big chance of qualifying, and it all just it seems to, I don't know, drag Canadian football off the rails. Certainly at World Cup levels for what, three or 4 decades.
The ripple effect from this one incident, just when they were on the up, has been huge. So yeah, there was a big investigation took place. No criminal proceedings though, because it was out of Canadian jurisdiction. So yeah, one little bit of fortune there, but obviously playing bans. 4 players ultimately were banned for significant amounts of time. Vrablic, the key one amongst them, he never, as Steven said, never returned to the national team, but barely played football again after that. So yeah, the player who could have led them onto who knows what in the coming tournaments could have been the inspiration, I guess, for the next generation of talent, was just lost to the game entirely, let alone lost to Canada. So yes, big disappointment to go off the back of their big success that they'd had in reaching and performing so well in the 1986 World Cup. But yes, as you said there, Stephen, then the decades that followed, Canada suffered repeated tales of woe. A series of poor qualifying attempts. So in 1990, they were actually out after just 2 matches, going out on away goals to Guatemala in the opening round knockout over 2 legs. And I guess the sort of asterisk to that one is they failed to take advantage of Mexico's suspension. So they weren't part of the World Cup for 1990, suspended due to fielding an ineligible player in a youth competition. We'll come on to that in the Mexico pod of whether that was harsh or not. But that was the fact. Canada had greater opportunity at that point, as did others. And that was the point where USA got their first qualification for 4 decades. So that Canada to have got across the line wasn't an unreasonable thought, but they didn't even get past the first round with Guatemala. In the 1994 World Cup, though, they did come close-ish to qualifying again. So the USA obviously weren't taking part this time. Canada got to the final group, and the final game of that was home to Mexico, of course, knowing a win would take Canada to the finals, to the USA. They went 1-0 up as well, but ultimately lost 2-0, which put them into the interconfederational playoff with Australia. Now, both teams there won 2-1 at home, and Canada then lost on penalties in the away leg, that away leg in Australia. Had they got past Australia, though, Stephen, who would they have faced in the next round of the playoffs? It would have been Argentina and Diego Maradona. Now, that could have been something quite special for Canada. You think about, not for their prospects, no doubt. I mean, Australia were narrowly beaten rather than resoundingly beaten. But merely the occasion, even if you lose, to have that occasion, to have the Argentine team turn up with Maradona would have stirred something, surely, in Canadian soccer.
You would have think it would have been great if they'd taken them back to, the venue
St. John's,
to St. John's. I doubt that would have been the case, but that would have been absolutely spectacular. And I'd manage that.
Freezing cold November evening or something, yes.
Yeah, a proper can. Yeah, but can you do it at Stoke on a cold Tuesday night? It's that would have been a really tantalising prospect. And again, it would have been such a massive boost for football in Canada to say, well, look, there's Diego Maradona, but yeah, not to be. And from there, things, there's a defined trickle down in performance, and the hopes of getting to the point where it almost becomes you look at El Salvador, they qualified for the first World Cup, I properly remember, in '82, and I've been waiting for them to get back ever since. In that respect, it's kind of, there you have Canada, not even getting to the final round of qualification in CONCACAF, which is, yes,
which takes some doing.
That always felt like it took some doing. If you couldn't get into that final 6, for the final round of qualifying, and you had kind of like Trinidad and Tobago qualifying. Was it 2000? And
Six.
So 2006 they qualified. Obviously Jamaica made it in 98 for the first time, and Honduras made it back. And you'd think, well, if they can, then surely Canada can. But they looked light years away from doing such a thing. As the millennium came and into the 21st century.
Yeah, very much so. And you kind of think 94 was the biggest missed opportunity in terms of exposure. I guess having the World Cup on their doorstep, they could have basked in a little bit of that glory. I know they're sharing the hosting this time. They wouldn't have been then, but with it being so close, so many people could have traveled to games. Well, as they did, they hosted teams in the build-up to it. They had a draw with Brazil, oddly enough, but they could have sort of made a bit more of that side of things if they were themselves off to the USA straight after. It would have drawn huge attention. It would have been a perfect time zone for them as well. And then I guess it's also at a point where football was starting to develop again in North America. The MLS League comes along a couple of years down the line. And yeah, the opportunity to bring attention, I suppose, was a missed one. But yes, beyond that, you're absolutely right. It's a tale of more woe, embarrassingly so at times. So yes, you mentioned that 1998 qualifiers. Jamaica were the much smaller nation who did make it through that time around. Canada reached the final round, but they finished last in that group, well behind Jamaica. A brief positive blip a couple of years later when they actually won the CONCACAF Gold Cup in the year 2000. Bit of a surprise win. They were coached by the German Holger Osiek at this point. But if you delve a little deeper, scratch beneath the surface, it's not quite all it seems, I don't think. So they got through the group level on every measure with South Korea, that well-known CONCACAF nation, South Korea, for second place, which was decided by a coin toss. Then they beat Mexico in the quarterfinal. Okay, fair enough. Golden goal, good stuff. Before defeating two more guest nations, Peru and Colombia, to win the tournament. Strange one with all those guest nations. Former Ipswich stalwart and at the time West Ham goalkeeper Craig Forrest was the tournament MVP, as it was, of course, termed in North America. I don't know how much credit Canada can really take for this tournament when there were so many guest nations, not full strength. It did lead them on to briefly rub shoulders with the elite again, though, in the much maligned Confederations Cup, because obviously as regional champions, that's where they were heading for the following year. They drew again with Brazil. This seems to be a recurring theme. They like to play Brazil. If only they could face them in these regional playoffs or World Cup groups, they'd have been all right. They could also have played in the 2001 Copa America as a guest, but withdrew on security grounds, missed out on another golden opportunity. And I guess that brief little golden period was gone. Do you give them any credit for winning the Gold Cup against non-North American nations and weakened ones at that?
I think you have to, to win anything. That would have been such a massive boost for them to be able to go out there and win their own, confederation, international tournament is by no means. You can't, turn around and not enjoy that victory if you're Canadian on the basis that other teams put in weakened sides. There's sometimes in the Copa America that the bigger nations will pull the punches over who goes and who doesn't go. Brazil will often send, a squad that's half made up of, Olympic squad players rather than World Cup squad players. And, a lot of nations do that in a lot of those tournaments. But no, I think Canada's victory has to be valid. It comes as a bright point in a poor era. And the fact that they went and played, I used to enjoy the Confederations Cup, the fact that it was just...
Yeah, me too. I liked it.
two groups of four, and as World Cups and European Championships were being expanded in unwieldy manners, it was just a little bit of an oasis of normality, really. Two 4-team groups with the top two going through. And
it was a nice little warm up to the actual World Cup itself, wasn't it? The year before, test a few things out, pretend you're all imagining what it's going to be like the following summer. It was great.
It was. I did. I had time for the Confederations Cup. So, just to give them the experience of that. So those players involved there will be, such a highlight of their career to A, win the Gold Cup, and then B, go and play in the Confederations Cup and to play in those stadiums and, to go and hold Brazil to a draw. And, you look at the results they got there, Cameroon, they don't lose by huge amounts. They again, a bit like 86, they don't disgrace themselves by any means of the imagination. And, it's that classic story. If you don't take everyone seriously, if you don't take that team seriously, that minnow can bite. So no, I think it should stand as a proud achievement, and it's not up to Canada to dictate which nations send which players.
Very true. You can only beat what's in front of you, even if it is with the toss of a coin. But yes, this was a bit of a blip, a positive blip, of course, but a strange little anomaly in a period of decline, as you mentioned. So yeah, they went into World Cup qualifying after that. In 2002, they failed to reach the final group, knocked out by Trinidad and Tobago. In 2006, it was the same story. Costa Rica, Guatemala, and Honduras knocked them out before the final group round. So we're not even getting close to qualifying here. For 2010, they'd sunk so low by this point, they had to play a preliminary round against St. Vincent and the Grenadines. I mean, goodness me, this is like Bermuda all over again. At least they got through that before they could reach the first round group. Well, they ultimately went winless against Mexico, Honduras, and Jamaica, well short again of the final group stage. 4 years later, more preliminary fun. Goodness me, we got St. Kitts and Nevis, Puerto Rico, and St. Lucia in a group with Canada. Okay, they managed to get through that, thankfully, before another failure in the opening group stage, which helped them sink to their lowest ever FIFA World Ranking, whatever store you put by that. The fact that they'd sunk to 122, I think that does say a lot, regardless of how accurate everything is in those rankings. To stoop that low is not good. Then for 2018, they had to play 2 preliminary knockout rounds against Dominica and then Belize. Thankfully made it through those before, again, failing to make the final round of qualifiers, this time behind Mexico and Honduras. So in all those tournaments up to the latest one, they haven't even made it to the final round of qualifying. And it all sounds very exotic, a lot of that. I wouldn't mind being part of their touring party for some of these trips, let's be honest. But when you consider the size of the country, the resources, the sporting infrastructure in general, in modern times now, we're not talking very long ago for much of this. Infrastructure in general, not just football, but the wealth of the country, the population. It is a bit humiliating to have sunk that low, to have been in pre-group stage qualifiers with the likes of St. Kitts, Dominica, Belize, Puerto Rico, without being too disrespectful. And I love it when people say, no disrespect, but dish out a bit of disrespect. But Canada, the size of it, the resources of it, the wealth of it, it's awful to have sunk that low. Am I being harsh?
No, not at all. What was it? They were down in the 120s, I think they were at one point. And to think that, to go from that to qualifying for a World Cup just 8 years
Superbly.
later, it's a stunning turnaround of fortunes. Because they didn't reach the final qualifying stages of a CONCACAF World Cup qualification tournament for 5 successive tournaments. On the back of being there, for the qualifiers, the final stage of the qualifiers in 98, 2002, 2006, 2010, 14 and 18.
And 18, yep.
To go so far and then for it to just go so stratospheric for 2022 is an extraordinary turnaround. So it really is. So for someone sat there, in Canada to say, look, we need to get serious about this, and there's this looming World Cup to co-host in partially co-host in 2026. They can't just stumble into that as accidental hosts and all that type of stuff. They need to look like they're not going to embarrass themselves. So that motivation was clearly there to do that, but even so, to turn things around so emphatically, to go out and win the qualifying section, to finish top of the qualifying section in CONCACAF for the 2022 World Cup was just unreal. It begs belief to go from one extreme, to the other in such a turnaround. Where no matter how much money might be pumped into a confederation, even then you'd have to expect it to be modest by the standards of so many other football playing nations looking to qualify for that World Cup. That some serious work's been done there, and you have to, take your hat off to that, And I think that Canada and doing what they did for the 2022 World Cup is one of those stories that, fall into that ambiguity of the fact that it was in Qatar, and so much was made of of that when the football was eventually played. Argentina winning it absorbed so much light in the manner that they did it against France in the final, and so many other stories that, it will probably take a couple more decades to pass before that rise of Canada and what they did is, appreciated in the way that it should be.
Yeah, it's one of many stories from that World Cup. And I think time will actually show it, all other issues aside, to be a superb World Cup, the 2022. I think it always takes a bit of time to come to that realisation, I think, doesn't it? But I think Canada's story is definitely in there, the way they qualified. Just briefly on the barren spell before here, I wonder, do you think Owen Hargreaves made the right decision to play for England rather than Canada in that time?
Personally, yeah, I think for his own personally, yeah, I think he did. But I mean, if he
could have been the inspiration, couldn't he?
He could have been. He could have been inspiration for Canada. But could he have not found a way into the German side? In some resident
grounds, he could have done. Wales as well. He had a Welsh parent and an English parent, born in Calgary, and had lived and spent a lot of his youth in Germany. So yeah.
So yeah,
he probably hadn't spent that long in Canada, really.
No, not at all. But yeah, a touch of the Greg Rossetskis and all that type of thing. Yes. But yeah, there were a lot of Australian players, weren't there, in the 80s? And you look at Craig Johnston turning up for England, and he was in full England squads and never got on the pitch. But Tony Dorigo went to at least one World Cup and a couple of European Championships, I think it was. As an England player, being a proud Aussie, Christian Vieri, as the most Australian Italian there is, could have done it for his birth nation, but did it for Italy instead. So yeah, I get an Owen Hargreaves saying, yeah, I'm not Canadian national team's not for me, but yeah, he could have been that hero that maybe Canada could have rode the back to World Cups, or at least threatening to qualify for World Cups quicker than they did.
But you're absolutely right, though. The thought of hosting in 2026 had prompted, I guess, more investment in player development. And after Hargreaves' time, the new generation that was coming through of Canadian footballers was led by the first Canadian Champions League winner, Alphonso Davies of Bayern Munich. Then the most expensive Canadian player, Jonathan David, who joined Lille for €30 million in 2020. Mentioned too for the long-time Besiktas captain and legend Canadian appearance record holder who was still in the squad for 2022, Atiba Hutchinson. Helped also by this point, and you talk of the resource and infrastructure and so on, the establishment of the Canadian Premier League by this point, first fully pro league in Canada. Also, though, to note, 3 Canadian teams also play in the MLS and had been for a few years by this point. So, yes, we've got some real quality coming through. We've got a bit of infrastructure about things. I mean, just merely the mention of those players, we talk jokingly, I guess, of what Hargreaves may or may not have been able to do earlier, but he'd have probably been very much on his own, their one elite player in amongst a whole load of amateur setup. Whereas now, these players, Alphonso Davies in particular, achieving great things with one of Europe's biggest clubs, a serial Champions League winner, in that era. Well, as had Hargreaves been before him, I guess he's following in his footsteps in some regard, but we've got serious quality now, even if the depth isn't there.
Oh, without doubt. I think you've got, as well, what's great about that is that you've got this generation of players, and if you're Canadian, you're a kid and you're sat there watching your TV and thinking that player in Serie A plays his national football team for Canada. Players who've drifted through the Premier League, La Liga, Bundesliga, they play, in some of the best leagues and for some of the best teams, across Europe. You players who are pulling on shirts at Bayern Munich, at Juventus, and that has to be inspiring for the next generation that come along, because you're looking for the role models, you're looking for the heroes. And in Fonso Davis in particular, there you've got the first Canadian player to score a goal for Canada in the finals of a World Cup. In 2022, it's such a springboard for further generations to come, and for football to take that hold in Canada. And the fact that the World Cup will be on their doorstep, or parts of the World Cup will be on their doorstep, they'll get to watch games and feel the World Cup basically. We're all critics of FIFA, but when you see something like Canada and what it will mean to them, I think out of the 2026 World Cup, it'd be great to see games, World Cup finals games at the Azteca again, and all of that type of stuff. But I think it is those games in Canada and how they're received that I'm most interested in.
Well, you mentioned the Azteca, Stephen. They qualified for the World Cup thanks to a game in the Ice-Teca, as it was dubbed, in Edmonton, Alberta. We talked about St. John's. Well, they deliberately sent Mexico to Edmonton in freezing conditions to help them over the line, but they won the hexagonal qualification. They didn't sneak through. They went through in fine style. It earned them a dubious FIFA award. Nothing like the Peace Prize, I don't think. But they won the Most Improved Team award from FIFA. There you go. A nice little tale as well. That there's such a we've delved into how poor they were before. That the speed of the team's ascent, even though it should have been apparent for some time through the lengthy qualifying process, they were actually in with a shout. But neither the Federation nor the kit supplier Nike had properly or fully planned for their qualification. They were therefore the only team in Qatar without a newly designed and released kit for the tournament, which I guess shows that it was such an unusual, unlikely outcome to their minds, even though it seemed more apparent to onlookers for how well they were doing. All those failures, I guess, cut deep, but a rather different Canada in terms of experience and professionalism than the 186. They were probably a bit unlucky overall to be drawn into the group they were drawn into again in this case. So the last embers of Belgium's golden generation, who struggled at the World Cup but still had quality, obviously, plus two teams who would go on to reach the semi-finals in Croatia and Morocco. A bit unlucky against Belgium, really. I think they came out, played very much on the front foot, dictated play a lot, had 22 shots, failed to convert any of them, including an early penalty miss from Alphonso Davies. And that was an opportunity to pull off a major, well, it would have been a major shock, even though we knew Belgium were past their prime there. Davies did score, as you mentioned, Stephen. Yes, he did score against Croatia in the next game. They took the lead even. Hurrah! But then lost 4-1. Oh dear. So they were eliminated after just 2 games again. But again, I think it's just so unfortunate that they weren't that far away from doing something a little better. They were actually playing well. They were a good team. They lost 2-1 to Morocco again to finish bottom of the group. No points again. A disappointing exit, I guess, after this time increased hopes and missed opportunities in the opening game, especially. But 2 goals to their name now, a wave of optimism, and they can look forward to 2026 with positivity and with Jesse Marsh in their corner. What could possibly go wrong?
Yes, what could possibly go wrong with Jesse Marsh in their corner? But it's got to be fantastic to see. What will go wrong? It would be a bit like when New Zealand kind of like managed to get themselves a point in South Africa in 2010. I think that's the thing.
Only unbeaten team.
Yeah, only unbeaten team. This is what we're looking for. We're looking for Canada to take that type of solace and say, look, no, that can be us. We can be that unbeaten team, or we can be that team that kind of like goes that bit further than the previous 2 Canadian World Cup teams. But I mean, the great thing about that as well, you're looking at a set of players that have played together for so much longer than the 2022 version had and the 1986 version had, which gives and the fact that they're going to be playing games on home soil and they're going to have an entire nation behind them. You look at World Cups of the past and how inspiring that can be to a nation. South Korea in 2002, probably the biggest, example of that for a nation that's not expected to do much. But there's a Canada this time around that could feasibly go that little bit further than the previous two have. In not just being that plucky side that is stubborn to play against and makes life difficult for teams, but to actually go out there, get that point, maybe get that win that has been beyond the previous ones.
Well, who they'll be facing then? They'll still have many of the same key players as last time around, quite a young group, but they will be facing Qatar, the host from last time around. That has to be a potential winnable fixture, although Qatar do occasionally seem to become Asian champions in amongst being terrible at the World Cup. Switzerland, always decent, but aging, I would have thought by now. And UEFA Path A winner, Bosnia.
And the fact that, 3 teams can go through as well. I think that's a Canada whose supporters, have to be, they've got to be permitted to dream big, without a shadow of a doubt. And the fact that they'll be playing their games in, they're going to be playing in Vancouver, they're going to be playing in Toronto. There's got to be some big fanatical crowds,
absolutely.
But there'll be players involved for them that will be used to that kind of occasion. So yeah, I think for me, Canada's got to be one of the most interesting elements of this coming World Cup.
If there's one disappointment for me of it all in terms of the hosting, you mentioned the 2 Canadian venues. There are just 2, and there's only 13 games, which I guess is the only way Canada could really end up in a hosting situation in a huge tournament like it is these days. But yeah, that feels a little limited to me, but never mind. Anyway, we will see how they get on. But okay, let's get into any other business then, Stephen. In time-honoured tradition instigated by you, of course, I've sent you the charts from the 14th of September 1985, the day Canada secured that first ever World Cup place against Guatemala in good old St. John's, Newfoundland. Go on then, Stephen. You're known for your musical wisdom, shall we say. You spot the classics where the rest of us can only see dross. So what piques your interest in here?
As ever with these things, the higher up the charts, the less I'm interested.
Yeah.
As far as the top 10 is concerned, Drive at number 6, The Cars, is a classic. Got to love that bit of Kate Bush. Running Up the Hill's maybe not one of the best ones, but
Stranger Things fans love it.
Yeah, absolutely. I imagine they do. Yeah, I mean, going down the charts. I mean, again, it's this is not a classic by any means of the imagination. Even the Eurythmics at number 32, There Must Be an Angel Play With My Heart's not one of my favourites that they have. I would have to go with Cars at number 6, otherwise I'm dipping into kind of like under the 40. And they're not playing those songs on the top 40 on the radio.
They're not.
So
there's a lot of Madonna. There's a bit of Cliff Richard. There's a bit of Midge Ure. There's Body Rock by Maria Vidal.
I got You Babe because I love the Pretenders, but I was never a huge fan of UB40. And then it's a cover of a Sonny and Cher kind of 1960s classic. But for maybe for the Chrissy Hine part, I'd be there on the play and record button, and then when it's kind of like Ali Campbell's stop.
We got Money for Nothing.
That'd be
by
a lot
Dire
of work
Straits. Quite.
Yeah.
Money for Nothing, Dire Straits. That's okay. White Wedding, Billy Idol.
Yeah, I think some of these, it's one of those. You look at some of these songs and think, yeah, no. But then if I hear them on the radio, I think, actually, that is a good song.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, in there also, and this is
I got If I Was by Midge Ure is a bit of that's a decent song at number 29.
Oh, well, there you go. There's the obscure one because I haven't even got a clue what that goes like.
Go to YouTube once we finish on this and you'll say, yes, I know that.
Okay, I'm sure. One thing that is in here, though, and this is a neat little segue to the next thing, is Power of Love by Huey Lewis and the News. Now, that is from the number 1 movie of this time, Back to the Future. If we're unable to watch Canada's qualifier of Guatemala, cinema is an option. So Back to the Future was the biggest of the year. What else piques your interest in amongst this movie list?
Back to the Future is such a good movie. Absolutely love it. To the point that my son, who's not long turned 18, insisted we went and watched it at the cinema not so long ago. One of the multiplex cinemas was showing it, and he wanted to watch it in the cinema. I was like, yeah, I'll go and do this. This is Michael J. Fox heavy. This with Teen Wolf at number 2 as well.
I know. Yeah,
he's everywhere.
He's having a good year.
He is having a good year. Tail end of 85. Volunteers rings a bell from somewhere, and I can't quite remember what that was about. See, I was never really into like the Rambo movies and stuff like that. Re-release of Ghostbusters, is up at number 13. Gremlins, which I think he enjoyed at the time, was re-released again. That's at 14.
There's an awful lot of stuff I haven't heard of.
There is a lot that even I'm struggling to remember. I mean, National Lampoon's European Vacation. I did like the early Vacation movies. So maybe a European Vacation, or nipping back to the cinema to watch, Back to the Future, or maybe even Teen Wolf. But I'd have to go with those, because although I remember Volunteers, it rings a bell somewhere. I can't even remember. Can't think of what it was about.
Can't help you there either.
I'm going to go for a Ghostbusters or a Gremlins or a Back to the Future, something high 80s.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Ghostbusters and Gremlins feels wrong because they're re-released again. So I think 85 means Back to the Future. I think
it does.
That's where it's got to start and end there. But if you didn't want to go to the movie, Stephen, television, well, you could be watching the last night, the Proms. I think that's more your thing, is it? BBC Two and then on to BBC One. You could have spent the entire evening watching that whilst Canada were enjoying their success against Guatemala. Is that your thing?
Not really my thing. All those flag wavers and kind of like
bobbing up and down,
bobbing up and down, bow to hats as far as the eye can see, and all that type of stuff. It was just totally unrepresentative of my childhood in the 1980s. That's for certain. Quite
well. You could always have hung on, and after the first part of last night, the Proms, if it didn't quite hit your fancy, you could have watched Lolita on BBC Two. That's an interesting one. But ITV, I suspect this was more your bag, Stephen, where Russ Abbott's Madhouse followed by 3-2-1. I think this is hitting the spot a bit better.
That is incredibly 1980s night of it on ITV. A-Team as well. Blockbusters.
A-Team, yes.
Yeah, Blockbusters, A-Team. Child's Play, which I do remember, where it was kind of like getting kids to describe things, and then the panelists would have to try and figure out what the kids were describing. So it'd be, I can kind of vaguely remember that. Yeah, bit of Russ Abbott.
So definitely good stuff on ITV on this day.
A mind-bending hour watching 3-2-1, followed by Dancing Makepeace does sound. It does sound the right way to do it.
Oh, and this is, of course, after you've spent the afternoon either watching golf on Grandstand or international athletics from Crystal Palace.
Definitely a bit of the golf as that weekend's going along.
The Ryder Cup, it says here, from the Belfry. Well, there you go.
85 Ryder Cup, first time that Europe win it. First time America hadn't won it since something like the 50s or so. But yeah, a bit of Hill Street Blues at 10 o'clock on Channel 4 as well there, by the look of it.
Yes, definitely avoid the BBC on that day.
Yeah, it's not a BBC. Definitely not a night for the BBC.
They're fulfilling their obligations to show the Proms, let's be fair to them, but not for me either. In sporting news, though, prior to the upcoming 1-1 draw with Romania, there's headlines about AC Milan's Mark Hateley battling to beat an illness ahead of that game, while Emlyn Hughes insists that Bobby Robson should not pick Glenn Hoddle and also should leave out Ray Wilkins, Mark Hateley, Terry Fenwick, John Barnes and Chris Waddle. He does seem to pick 11 players he would like to see, but there's an awful lot he wouldn't. Unsurprisingly, Ray Wilkins disagrees, mainly about Hoddle, but I suspect also about himself. But that game did end up as a 1-1 draw, England-Romania, 86 World Cup qualifier. Robson most put out at the concession of a goal, which meant qualification was not assured yet. So on to the next for them. Terry Fenwick, meanwhile, who did play in that game, despite what Emlyn Hughes thought, according to the Mirror, one of the stars of that performance. He's been charged with bringing the game into disrepute, having made provocative gestures at Newcastle United fans at St James's Park, having scored a goal against them for Queen's Park Rangers. I mean, goodness me. Now, can I just point out, Terry Fenwick, he's from Seaham. which is on the North Sea coast. It is Sunderland territory.
I think he protests his innocence a little too much there.
Yes, I think it's fair to say.
Does Terry Fenwick.
He protests it at great length, according to the quotes here. But yes, the gist of his defence seems to be, I didn't do it, which, yeah. Apparently it left his World Cup place in jeopardy, but he still made the trip to Mexico and was there to not chop Maradona down as he raced past him on the way to a certain goal. In other news, meanwhile, yes, Charlton and Crystal Palace fans joining forces in protest at plans for a Selhurst Park ground share. I wonder how that will go.
Yeah, absolutely. We can only hope that in time, the Valley will return, Aidan. I'm positive. Do you know what? I can remember going to a Liverpool-Charlton game. And it was December '89. It would have been one of the coldest. It felt like my feet had frozen to the steps of the car. And we got there kind of like about 2 hours before kickoff to make sure we got through the turnstiles. Because it was a game between Christmas and New Year, and everyone obviously wanted to be out the house and kind of like get away from the chaos of a family Christmas. And I can remember there being a leaflet, and I've probably still got it because I'll have the programme still knocking around somewhere. And there was a leaflet inside from Charlton fans asking, Liverpool fans, and they were doing this at every away ground they were going last season to back their campaign to take Charlton back to the Valley. And, I'm always keeping an eye on that and thinking, I hope they do it. And they did, which was great. And then I got to go to the Valley as well a fair few times while Charlton were up in the Premier League. So, yeah, I was...
Happier times will come eventually.
Happier times will come for Charlton. Then they'll have some more bumpy times, obviously.
Well, quite. The most bizarre story, though, after all of those in the sports news was Sheffield Wednesday's Simon Steinrod being tipped for a potential move to Barcelona Castilla. Not Barcelona, Barcelona Castilla.
Castilla, which doesn't even kind of like exist properly. The reporter there has got his Real Madrid and Barcelona reserve sides totally arse to face within that. But yeah, the story of Simon Steinrod possibly teaming up with Terry Venables at Barcelona was that is a serious kind of head scratcher. I have no recollection of that particular story. I thought Simon Steinrod was a decent first division striker. He always
that's not quite the stuff Barcelona players are made of.
Barcelona, no. Given how much they initially kicked off over Steve Archibald replacing Diego Maradona, only to eventually love him as a title winning striker. Yeah, I think Simon Steinrod might have been an outlandish transfer too far for Terry Venables, I think.
Needless to say, Steinrod's dream move did not happen. Anyway, one little and finally for you, Stephen, a little Canadian themed quiz. Let's see how much you know about our Canuck friends. Now, we mentioned Owen Hargreaves there, born in Calgary, Alberta. He's not alone, though. There's plenty of other Canadian footballers or those with Canadian connections who opted to play elsewhere. There was indeed one at the 22 World Cup who played against Canada, also performed heroics through the knockout rounds and reached the semi-finals. Any idea who that might be? I must confess I had no clue about this until randomly Googling Canadian football facts.
I'm trying to think of who made the semi-finals. And who
well, two were in their group that we mentioned.
I'm going for a Belgian. Is there a Belgian in there?
No. They went out of the group. There was the other two in their group. Croatia and Morocco got through along with Argentina and France.
Oh, Croatia. No, not a clue, Aid.
He was quite a character of the World Cup, actually. Yassine Bono, Morocco's goalkeeper. Born in Montreal.
Oh, my word.
Born in Montreal.
That's amazing stuff. Hey, I've totally forgotten that Morocco made the semi-finals of the last World Cup. But yeah, absolutely amazing. So that's the thing that I'll know those nuggets of information about 20 years from now.
Yes, you'll store this one up. You'll bring it out of the bag at some point much further down the line.
Yeah, because that's it. I'm now in a position where I'm starting to feel like I know more about the 98 and 2002 World Cup than
You're allowed to now, yeah, exactly.
I have done over the last 20, 25 years. I'm suddenly feeling like, yeah, I kind of know a bit about those now. So, yeah, ask me that question again in about 20 years' time. I'll get that right.
Will do, yep. Others who could have played for Canada at some point, including goalkeeper Asmir Begovic, another top international goalie. His family fled Bosnia when he was young, first to Germany, but then to Edmonton, Alberta, and that's where his footballing education came. You see him as a pundit now with a distinct North American twang. He was indeed called up by Canada a couple of times, but never capped. Former Northern Ireland international Alan Manus was born in Mississauga, Ontario. Also went ignored by the Canadians. Jimmy Nicol.
Oh my word! I think I knew. Yeah, I knew that somewhere. Yeah, I knew the Jimmy.
Born in
Nicol.
Hamilton, Ontario.
Yeah.
Went to 2 World Cups in Northern Ireland. Jonathan de Guzman, born in Scarborough, Ontario, played for the Netherlands, as did 1988 Euros winner John Van Schip, born in Fort St. John, British Columbia.
Wow.
So there you go. There's plenty there. On this theme, though, here's another one for you, Stephen. This might be a fact you can bring out in 30 years' time. There is a current England international defender with hopes of going to the 2026 World Cup who was born in Calgary, Alberta. Any ideas who that would be?
Let me think. I'm trying to think of English current international defenders.
He's on the fringes.
We're not looking at
Italy. He plays in Italy.
Oh, he plays in Italy. Are we looking at what's his name? It's not Chris Smalling, is it? It's not was it Tomori? Or
it is indeed. Fikayo Tomori. Yeah.
Fikayo Tomori. Excellent stuff.
Calgary, Alberta.
Yeah. Calgary, Alberta. Yeah. Well, for me, I've been put on the spotlight of the questions there. For out of absolutely nowhere, Craig Forrest and Paul Pescalino kind of like popped into my mind.
They're proper Canadians.
I couldn't see past them for some reason. It was just kind of like, they're not in relation to anywhere near being the answers to the questions I'm being asked.
No.
Yeah. But
well, I'll give you an easy one to finish. Do you have a Canadian ice hockey team of choice? I'm assuming your Canadian football team of choice would be the Vancouver Whitecaps, based on everything you said. They're one of the 3 MLS teams, I should point out: Vancouver, Toronto, and Montreal. The others,
yeah, it's always got to be there. I mean, Bruce Grobbelaar and Peter Beardsley played for the Whitecaps, so it was kind of like, yeah, I'm kind of like cast in stone there. But yeah, I don't know, maybe the Toronto Maple Leafs or
there we go. Yeah. Good knowledge.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Stephen, for our tour of all things Canada. I think this promised to be the shortest and of these 3 World Cup host pods, but I think we've managed to fill the time quite admirably there with quite a bit of stuff. There will be other modules, like I say, looking at the other 2 hosts, USA and Mexico, and plenty of other World Cup themed pods, hopefully, on what we have dubbed now, you have to say that's magnificent, the subsection of the rest of our Your Boys Took a Hell of a Beating output. So do subscribe wherever you can, spread the word and all of that. Thank you very much, Stephen.
Absolute joy to do.
Magnificent. Well, thanks you for listening too, and do join us again on the next pod. Thank you and bye.